Claire Thompson had once believed that the most frightening thing in a marriage was being hated in public, being betrayed in front of everyone, or being abandoned in a way so obvious that no one could ask her to prove her pain. Later, she came to understand that there was a much quieter kind of hell. Living beside a man the whole world loved for the very qualities he used to hurt her in private. People called Evan Thompson the model of the modern husband. They called him a man who knew how to listen, how to respect women, how to love his family, how to speak about healing, boundaries, kindness, and emotional responsibility in a voice so warm that hundreds of thousands of people clicked like before the video even ended. Online, Evan had gentle eyes, the perfect smile, a hand often placed over his chest when he spoke about sincerity, and a way of pausing between sentences as if he were truly weighing every word so he would not hurt anyone. But inside the house in the suburbs of Los Angeles, when the live stream lights went off, when the white ring light no longer reflected in his eyes, when the phone was placed face down on the table and that warm voice no longer had to serve an audience, Claire was the only one who lived with the rest of him. And that part of him never spoke about healing. That part measured every expression on her face, corrected every sentence she said, looked at a kitchen she had not yet had time to clean as if it were a moral failure, turned her exhaustion into ingratitude, turned her silence into proof that she was hard to love, and then the next morning posted a story with the caption, "Marriage is not about perfection, it is about choosing kindness when it is hard." Evan's most viral video that summer was filmed right in their living room. Claire remembered that afternoon with painful clarity, because she had stood in the kitchen for nearly an hour before he pressed record, slicing fruit, rearranging the cups on the open shelf, wiping the stone countertop for the third time, not because the house was too messy, but because Evan said the background needed to feel lived in, be elevated. He always used phrases like that, phrases that sounded professional, bright, harmless, but after years with him, Claire understood they usually meant she had to do one more thing so their life would look natural on camera. The living room had been arranged like a scene from a film about peaceful modern American family life. A linen-colored sofa, earth-toned throw pillows, a stack of books about leadership and emotional intelligence on the coffee table, a handmade ceramic mug still steaming, glass doors behind him opening onto a yard with a small olive tree and string lights across the patio. Evan sat on the edge of the sofa, wearing a simple but expensive white t-shirt, dark jeans, his hair lightly styled, his beard neatly trimmed, a small microphone clipped to his collar. He looked into the camera, took a breath, waited exactly 3 seconds the way he always did, then said, "If you want to know who a man really is, look at how safe the people closest to him feel when he walks into the room." Later, that sentence would be cut into thousands of short clips, layered with piano music, and reposted on pages of Out Healthy Love. While he spoke, Claire stood in the kitchen, still holding a towel, watching through the opening between the two rooms. She heard that sentence move through the air inside the very house, where she often held her breath, whenever she heard his car pull into the driveway. Evan went on about how men had to learn not to use power to control, but to use their presence to create safety. He spoke about how a real husband did not make his wife smaller. He said one sentence that made social media lose its mind with emotion. "A woman should not have to shrink herself to be loved. If she has to become smaller for you, you are not loving her. You are owning her." Claire stood frozen at that line for so long that water from the towel dripped onto the floor without her noticing. One part of her wanted to laugh, but nothing about it was funny. Another part of her wanted to walk into the frame, stand behind him, place a hand on his shoulder like influencer wives often did, and tell the camera to please look carefully at this man when he was not being filmed. But she did nothing. She only bent down and wiped the drop of water from the floor. That was what Evan had taught her over the years without ever needing to call it teaching. Her reaction could always be used against her. If she cried, she was unstable. If she got angry, she was reactive. If she stayed silent, she was withholding. If she tried to explain, she was spiraling. If she told the truth in front of other people, she was trying to embarrass him. So Claire did what people who have been worn down learn to do very well. She focused on the small task in front of her, so she would not have to look directly at the larger thing swallowing her. The video was posted at 8 that night. By 9:30, it had more than 100,000 views. Claire sat at the kitchen table, the light from her phone screen washing over her face, reading the comments one by one like someone pressing needles into her skin just to check if she could still feel anything. He's husband goals. Imagine being married to a man this emotionally intelligent. His wife is so lucky. This is what safe masculinity looks like. Claire, girl, you won, one woman wrote. I sent this to my husband and told him to learn from Evan. Another wrote, every woman deserves a man who talks like this. Claire stared at T8 at line for a long time. Every comment praising him was another pane of glass placed between her and the truth. None of them knew that 10 minutes before filming, Evan had stood exactly where she was sitting now, looked down at the pale blue shirt she was wearing and said, that color washes you out. I need you to understand that when you appear in the background, it affects the whole tone. None of them knew that when she said she did not plan to appear in the video, he had sighed, smiled lightly, and said, you always make it about whether you want to be seen. Sometimes supporting me means understanding the ecosystem. None of them knew she had changed her shirt, not because she agreed, but because she was too tired to turn a shirt into a battlefield. None of them knew that after he said on camera that women should not have to shrink themselves to be loved, he had turned to her the moment he stopped recording and said, you could have smiled when you walked by. The energy behind me was heavy. When Evan walked into the kitchen that night, Claire was still looking at her phone. He did not ask how she felt with the whole world calling her lucky. He did not ask whether she had eaten dinner. He looked around the kitchen, at the pan in the sink, at the towel still draped over the edge of the sink, at a bowl sitting slightly crooked on the drying rack, and his voice dropped, flatter and colder than it had been in the video. Why is the kitchen still a mess? Claire looked up. On her phone screen, a new comment appeared. A man like this proves good husbands still exist. She turned off the screen. I'll clean it. Evan placed his own phone face down on the table. That's not what I asked. She looked at him, and for 1 second she saw the shift that outsiders never saw. It was not that he became loudly angry. Evan was rarely loud. What made him frightening was the way his voice became smaller, slower, more precise, like a doctor pointing at test results and asking the patient to face an undeniable truth. I just filmed for an hour. I just handled comments. And I have a brand call with New York tomorrow morning. You were home all afternoon, Claire said. I was working too. I finished the proposal for the client at 6. Evan closed his eyes for a second, as if she had exhausted him with a childish defense. Claire, please don't do the comparison thing. It makes you sound resentful. She went silent. He stepped over to the dishwasher, opened it, and looked inside. You loaded this wrong again. She watched his hands move the plates around, every motion calm, and realized that maybe the whole world would never believe that a man could speak about safety with such gentle eyes and still make his wife feel like a small mistake inside her own home. When they first fell in love, Evan did not seem like the kind of man who would one day make Claire afraid of the sound of his sigh. He met her in Austin, before they moved to Los Angeles, at a networking event for creative businesses. Claire was 30 then, working as a brand strategist for a small studio, with shoulder-length brown hair, a wide smile, a habit of talking fast when she was excited, and a way of using her hands to sketch ideas in the air. Her friends used to say that when Claire entered a room, the room became brighter. Evan was not famous yet. He was building a coaching platform for young entrepreneurs, had a podcast with a few thousand listeners, and posted regularly about discipline, purpose, and emotional clarity. He was handsome in a clean-cut way, ambitious but careful to cover that ambition in the language of service. He did not brag about wanting to be famous. He said he wanted to help men become more conscious. He listened to Claire talk about branding as if she had just opened a map for him. He asked sharp questions. He remembered her clients' names, remembered that she liked mezcal but hated overly sweet cocktails, remembered that she had grown up in a family where her parents fought loudly, which made her hate it when people lost control of their voices. When he said, I'm not interested in being loud, I'm interested in being honest, Claire believed that was a rare quality. She did not know that a person did not need to raise his voice to wound deeply, as long as he was skilled enough to make someone else doubt the sound of her own pain. The first things that felt off were so small they could have been called personality. Evan often spoke for Claire when they were with friends. If someone asked what project she was working on, she would barely begin explaining before he stepped in with a cleaner, shinier, more professional version. What Claire means is, he would say, then turn her story into a perfect pitch. People usually laughed and said they made a great team. At first, Claire laughed too. She thought Evan was just interested, just good at expressing things, just proud of her. But after a few times, she realized every sentence he corrected made her a little smaller. When she spoke an idea that was still rough, he made it polished. When she told a funny story, he added the punchline. When she showed anger toward a difficult client, he placed his hand on her knee under the table and said, "She's passionate," in the voice of someone translating a child's emotions for adults. One night after dinner with friends, Claire said in the car, "Do you realize you talk for me a lot?" Evan kept his eyes on the road, not immediately irritated. "I thought I was supporting you." "I know, but sometimes I haven't finished speaking." He nodded very slowly. "Okay, I hear you. I just notice you tend to over-explain when you're nervous. I'm helping you land the plane." It sounded reasonable. She did sometimes talk too much when she was anxious. She told herself she was being too sensitive. The next time he spoke for her, she shortened herself first. Evan's control never began as a command. It began as feedback. He suggested she wear more neutral colors when she accompanied him to events because visual cohesion matters. He suggested she share fewer personal stories on her own Instagram because once people know us, everything you post affects the brand. He suggested she practice speaking more slowly because your intel agents lands better when you don't rush. He suggested she stop having a second drink at work dinners because people notice more than you think. Each suggestion on its own was not serious enough to fight over. Some of them were even partly true. Claire could speak quickly. Claire could wear bright colors. Claire could joke a little too honestly after drinking wine. But over time, her life filled with invisible lines. She stood in front of her closet longer, choosing whatever would give him less reason to comment. She reread captions 3 times before posting, and then did not post at all. She sat through dinners, hearing herself speak so slowly she no longer sounded like herself. When she asked Evan one night whether he thought he was trying to fix her too much, he looked at her sadly. "I'm just helping you become the version of yourself you keep saying you want to be." That sentence silenced her, because how do you argue with someone who says he is helping you become better, especially when you once believed he saw your potential? Evan began rising faster after they moved to Los Angeles. At first, it was a podcast clip about men learning to apologize without becoming defensive. Then a TikTok video about 3 things emotionally unavailable men do without realizing it. Then interview requests. Then a paid coaching program. Then supplement brands, meditation apps, communication courses for couples, a book deal. Evan was no longer just a man with interesting opinions. He became an image, a bright, kind, mature image, packaged with just enough everyday warmth to make viewers believe it was real. Claire felt proud at first. She had helped him reshape his brand identity, adjust the website colors, restructure the course, and refine the way he spoke on camera. Evan often said publicly that his wife was the quiet genius behind so much of what I do. People praised him for appreciating his wife. But at home, when Claire suggested putting her name under the creative strategy section of the website, Evan said, "I don't want people to think this is a husband-wife brand. It dilutes the message." When she reminded him that many of the ideas were hers, he kissed her forehead and said, "I know. I see you. Why do you need strangers to see it too?" The question made her feel ashamed for wanting credit. She stepped back. Online, he continued calling her the quiet genius. In real life, her quietness became a requirement. One of Evan's most beloved photos was a picture of him holding Claire in the kitchen, his chin resting on the top of her head, his eyes closed with the caption, "Home is not a place. It is the person who lets you be fully human." That photo had been taken 10 minutes after she cried in the bathroom. That day, Evan had filmed a video about how to love a strong woman, and he wanted Claire to walk in at the end, place her hand on his shoulder, and make it feel like a natural moment. Claire said she was not comfortable. Her eyes were swollen from allergies, her hair was unwashed. She had a pressing deadline, and she did not want to be a prop in content about herself. Evan smiled very lightly, the smile he used when she disappointed him in a way he had already predicted. "You realize how strange it is that I'm building a platform around honoring women and my wife won't stand beside me for 10 seconds. She said, "You don't need me in the video to talk about respecting women." He answered, "No, but it helps people feel the truth of it." Truth. He always used the word truth for things that needed to be stayed. When she still said no, he sighed, looked at the camera, and said, "This is the part people don't see. They think support just happens. They don't see the resistance." That sentence made her cry because she was so tired. She went into the bathroom, locked the door, and cried silently so she would not ruin the audio if he kept filming. 10 minutes later, when she washed her face and came out, Evan was standing in the kitchen with his phone. "Come here," he said, his voice softer. She was too empty to refuse. He pulled her into him, took the photo, and kissed her hair. The caption was written in less than a minute. Thousands of people commented that this kind of love made them believe in marriage. The first time Claire tried to talk to her old best friend Maya, she chose her words very carefully. They met at a small cafe in Silver Lake, where the walls were painted white, plants hung overhead, and everyone had a laptop open as if they were all writing something important. Maya had known Claire before Evan, back when they both worked in Austin. Maya had loved Claire's loudness, brightness, and quick mind. But over the years, distance had grown between them, partly because Claire was busy, and partly because Evan always said Maya doesn't respect boundaries. Whenever she invited Claire to spend time with her alone too often. That day, Claire sat across from Maya, turning her coffee cup in her hands, and said, "Sometimes he's different at home." Maya tilted her head. Different how? The question was simple, but Claire felt her throat go dry. How could she explain a different person through cuts that did not bleed? "He's cold. He says things that make me feel small, and then online he says the opposite." Maya was quiet for a moment, then said gently, "Evan is very intense, but I think people who do public work like he does are probably under a lot of pressure." Claire nodded, as if she herself were also trying to protect him. "Yeah, I know," Maya went on. "He always speaks so well of you, though." "Really? Every time someone mentions you, he calls you brilliant." Claire looked down at the table. The word brilliant in Evan's mouth had never opened a door for her. It only hung her on the wall as proof that he appreciated his wife. Maya placed her hand over Claire's. "Maybe you're exhausted. Living with someone internet famous must be strange." Claire smiled, because she did not want Maya to see that she had just been left alone again. Probably. When she got home, Evan asked how the meeting had gone. She said it was fine. He looked at her longer than necessary. "You told her about us?" It was not a question. Claire stayed silent. Evan smiled sadly. "I hope you were fair." That night, he posted a story about how men doing public work needed to learn to love their wives through her seasons of insecurity. Claire read that story while sitting on the bedroom floor, and for the first time, she saw clearly that he was not only controlling her inside the house. He was building a version of her in public, a weaker version, a more insecure version, a version that needed his compassion, so that if she ever told the truth, the world would already have a frame ready to call her a wounded woman who was seeing things wrong. From then on, Evan began rewriting Claire more openly. In a podcast, when asked how he kept his marriage strong while his work became more demanding, he smiled gently and said, "Claire is incredibly gifted, but she struggles with being seen. So part of loving her is not forcing her into the light before she is ready." The host nodded, moved. Claire listened to that segment in the car, on the way home from the grocery store, and had to pull over. She was not afraid of being seen. Before Evan, she had presented in front of clients, posted personal essays, stood on small stages at branding workshops. Evan was the one who had taught her that every time she was seen without passing through his control, it was a risk to the ecosystem. Now he was telling the world he was protecting her from a light she was not ready to step into. Another time, in a newsletter, he wrote, "My wife has taught me patience. Loving someone with a tender nervous system means understanding that not every reaction is about you." Claire read that sentence 3 times. Tender nervous system. He had turned her reactions to his control into a neurological trait. He made himself patient. He made her fragile. The world loved him more for it. "This is real love," someone commented. "Men need to learn this level of compassion." Claire began to feel like a side character in a book Evan was writing, where all her wounds were edited to make him look more gentle. Self-doubt did not arrive all at once. It came in cycles. After every cold version of Evan, there would be a soft version. After every time she felt herself made smaller, he would say the right thing, hold her at the right moment, post something that made people see them as a beautiful couple. Some mornings he made coffee for her and left a little note beside it. "Proud of you." Some evenings he sat next to her and watched a movie, his hand resting on her leg like it used to. Some days he apologized, not deeply enough, but enough to confuse her. "I know I can be sharp," he said once after she cried because he criticized the way she spoke to a client on the phone. "I'm under pressure. That doesn't make it okay." The sentence, "that doesn't make it okay," sounded exactly like the healing language he taught to millions of people, and Claire wanted to believe it. She wanted to believe that a man who could name a mistake could also fix it. But after the apology usually came a new adjustment. He no longer said she spoke too fast. He said she loses authority when anxious. He no longer said her clothes did not suit her. He said the silhouette fights the message. He no longer said she embarrassed him. He said when you withdraw, it creates a narrative I can't control. The language changed. The mechanism stayed the same. Claire began writing everything down after one very small night. So small that if she told someone else, she was afraid they would not understand. Evan had just returned from a conference in San Diego, where he had spoken to more than 1,000 people about authenticity in marriage. At the airport, a fan recognized him, took a photo, and posted a caption saying, "Evan radiates kindness even exhausted." When he came home, he walked into the kitchen around 10 at night and found Claire eating cereal because she had worked late and had not cooked. He looked at the bowl, at the open laptop on the table, at her hastily tied hair, and said, "This is what I mean when I say you stop inhabiting your life." Claire put down her spoon. "I'm eating dinner." "No, you're collapsing into low standards and calling it survival." She looked at him, too tired to react. He went on, his voice light, almost pitying. "You don't see how much I carry. The house, the brand, the emotional tone, the way people experience us. And then I come home, and it feels like you just disappear." That sentence made her stand up, not out of anger, but because if she sat any longer, she would break. "I'm not part of the brand." Evan looked at her as if she had said something very naive. "Claire, at this point, everything is part of the brand." That night, when he went to shower, she opened the notes app on her phone and wrote down every sentence. At first, her hands shook. She felt as if she were doing something wrong, as if writing down her husband's words was a betrayal. Then she looked at her reflection in the black mirror of the phone screen and saw her own hollow face, her empty eyes, her mouth pressed tight to keep from crying. She kept writing, not for revenge, to keep the truth from being edited by him. After notes came messages. After messages came screenshots. After screenshots came recordings. The first time Claire turned on a recording, she nearly threw up from fear. Evan was standing in the dressing room, speaking in a low voice, saying she made him feel like he was married to resistance. He did not know her phone was recording from inside the pocket of the hoodie hanging over the chair. "You resist everything I'm building," he said. "Not through big actions, because you're too smart for that. You resist through energy, through your face, through the way you walk into a room like I've done something to you." Claire said very softly, "You have done a lot to me." Evan laughed without humor. "See, that sentence, that victim sentence. I can't do anything with someone committed to being harmed." She listened to the recording the next morning in the car, after he had kissed her cheek on camera to film a story about morning rituals that keep our marriage grounded. His voice in the file was not shouting. There was no swearing. There was not a single sentence that an outsider would hear once and immediately call abuse. But the whole recording felt like a sealed room without windows. It held erosion, denial, intelligence being used to make another person dim herself. Claire saved the file in a folder named Taxes 2021. She found herself learning to live like someone with a secret, except her secret was the truth. The major event came in October, when Evan was invited to give the keynote at a Los Angeles conference for content creators and young entrepreneurs. His topic was authenticity and love, building a life that can be seen. Tickets sold out in 2 days. The event had a paid live stream, media coverage from the communications industry, and several brands sponsored. Evan said this was a turning point. "This puts us in a different tier," he said in the kitchen, reading the email while drinking a smoothie. He still used us when he needed her sacrifice, but used I when accepting the spotlight. The organizers wanted Claire to appear at the end for a few minutes so Evan could honor the woman behind the work. When Evan told her that, Claire felt her stomach tight. "I don't want to go on stage." Evan did not look up. "It's not a speech. Just stand beside me." "I don't want to." He put his phone down very slowly. "Claire, thousands of people have followed our story. They care about you. They care about the version of me you tell them." He looked at her, his eyes narrowing. "Don't start." In those 2 words, she saw the whole man the world did not know. "Don't start," as if her truth were a mess that had to be stopped before it stained the surface. Evan continued, "This is bigger than your discomfort." That sentence stayed with her. Everything was always bigger than Claire's discomfort. The brand was bigger. The message was bigger. The audience was bigger. The healing work was bigger. Even his stories about love, were bigger than the woman he was turning into a prop. The night before the event, Evan rehearsed his talk in the living room. Claire sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open, though she was not working. He stood under the lights, clicker in hand, the screen behind him showing the first slide. Authenticity is what remains when performance ends. Claire looked at that sentence and felt something inside her close. Evan said, the people closest to us should never have to wonder which version of us is real. He paused and looked at Claire. How does that land? She looked at him. Do you really want to know? He smiled lightly. Of course. It sounds like something you should say to a mirror. The air in the room stopped. Evan set the clicker down. No camera, no audience, no sponsors. The light left his face. You need to be careful tomorrow. Claire held his gaze. Why? Because I can feel this energy in you. This little need to make me pay. You think I want to make you pay? I think you're in a season where your pain is looking for a stage. That sentence almost took her breath away. He had taken the very thing he lived on, his need for a stage, and placed it inside her like a diagnosis. I don't need a stage, she said. I need you to stop lying. Evan stepped closer to the table, braced both hands on the wood, and leaned down slightly. Listen to me. If you do anything tomorrow that puts me in a position where I have to repair a public misunderstanding, I will not protect you from the consequences. His voice was very quiet, very calm, very frightening. People love me because they know me. If you show up with some emotional story, they will see exactly what I have tried to protect you from. They will see that you're not okay. Claire looked at him and understood more clearly than ever. He had not just built an image to be loved. He had built that image as a wall around her. If she threw the truth at it, the world would think she was throwing stones at the man who had patiently loved an unstable wife. He had prepared the audience to doubt her before she ever spoke. Claire did not sleep. She sat in the small office where she used to build strategy for clients, which had now become the room where she kept folders of evidence. She listened to the recordings again. Evan calling her resistance. Evan saying she had victim energy. Evan saying she ruined the tone of the house. Evan saying everything is part of the brand. Evan saying on camera that women should not be made smaller. Evan saying off camera that the shirt she wore ruined the visual. She opened screenshots of newsletters where he called her someone with a tender nervous system. She opened the small video she had accidentally captured in the reflection of the glass door, where Evan had just ended a live stream, removed his microphone, and said to her, "Don't stand there looking wounded. It makes the room feel hostile." She did not know what she was going to do until nearly 3 in the morning. Then she created a 3-minute video file. No music, no red text, no voiceover, just Evan in public beside Evan in private. One sentence in front of an audience about safety. One sentence in the kitchen about her making the room heavy. One sentence on a podcast about loving a woman who does not shrink. One sentence in the dressing room about her having a victim sentence. A story calling her a genius. A message telling her not to post anything he had not reviewed because your tone is unpredictable. Claire watched the file once. She did not feel satisfied. She did not feel powerful. She only felt sad in a way that turned cold. Her truth was no longer a scream. It was a sequence of events that needed no decoration. On the day of the event, Evan was radiant. Not radiant in a flashy way. He knew how to wear expensive humility. A navy suit with no tie, an open-collar shirt, polished brown shoes, a minimalist watch, a neatly placed wireless microphone. Backstage there were flowers, bottled water, a monitor showing the livestream viewer count steadily rising. Evan hugged the organizers, thanked technicians by name, took photos with young fans who trembled at meeting him. Claire stood beside him in a simple black dress, her hair tied low, her lips not too bold. He placed his hand on her back whenever anyone looked, and each time his hand touched her, she felt like a mark of ownership had been placed exactly where it belonged. A female staff member said to her, "You must be so proud." Claire smiled. Yes, the word fell out of her mouth like a button dropping to the floor. Evan leaned toward her and whispered when no one could hear, "Today is not about your mood." She kept smiling. This time, the smile was not to reassure him. It was the last thing she allowed him to misunderstand. When Evan stepped onto the stage, the audience rose and applauded. Light washed over him, and the large screen behind him displayed his name and the theme, authenticity and love. He stood still, one hand over his chest, waiting for the applause to settle. Claire sat in the front row, among women wiping their eyes before he had even spoken, men nodding as if learning how to become better, creators holding up phones to capture every sentence. Evan began with the story of their home, of how he had learned gentleness from his quiet wife, of how marriage had taught him that authenticity was not about saying everything in public, but about living a life that did not need to be hid. Claire listened to every word, and for one strange moment she almost pitied him. Not forgiveness, not softness, just the sight of a man who had spent so many years building a character that perhaps he himself was afraid to meet the person underneath when the character fell away. He said, "Honesty is the foundation of everything. If you cannot tell the truth at home, your public life is just performance with better lighting." The audience applauded. Claire stood before she could give herself permission to be afraid. At first, no one noticed. She walked toward the side aisle beside the stage, where a technician was standing. Evan saw her from the corner of his eye, and for the smallest fraction of a second, his smile hardened. Claire did not climb onto the stage by grabbing the microphone or shouting. She went to the technician and said quietly that she was Evan's wife, that the tribute video had been changed. That Evan knew. She spoke so calmly, she barely recognized herself. The technician hesitated, but everything about the event had already been prepared for Claire to be part of a moment of honor, so her presence was not seen as a threat. Evan was still speaking, but his eyes followed her. Behind him, the slide changed. It was not the next slide in Evan's deck. It was Claire's video. The first clip was Evan at an event the week before, speaking into the camera. "A woman should never have to shrink herself to be loved." The audience stayed quiet, assuming this was an illustration. Immediately after came Evan's voice in their living room, the image unclear, only his voice. "You need to understand that when you appear in the background, it affects the whole tone." A few people gave uncertain laughs because they did not understand yet. The video continued. Evan on a podcast, "My wife has taught me patience." Then a message appeared on the screen, "Don't post that. Your tone is unpredictable." Evan on livestream, "Safety is how people feel when you enter the room." Then the recording from the kitchen, "You don't see how much I carry. The house, the brand, the emotional tone, the way people experience us." The temperature of the room began to change. You could feel the physical shift of a crowd when they do not yet know what they are witnessing, but they know it is no longer part of the script. Evan stood on the stage, his face paling under the lights. He said, "There seems to be a technical issue." His voice was still calm, but for the first time, Claire heard a small crack inside it. The video did not stop. Evan in public, "If she has to become smaller for you, you are not loving her." Evan in private, "Don't stand there looking wounded. It makes the room feel hostile." Evan in public, "Authenticity is what remains when performance ends." Evan in private, "At this point, everything is part of the brand." No one applauded. No one breathed loudly. The silence in the room was not the moved silence Evan usually created. It was the silence of a room that had just seen beautiful paint peeled away and discovered mold behind the wall. Evan stepped toward the wings, signaling for the technician to stop the video. But the video was almost over. The screen turned black with small white words. "I did not expose him. I stopped hiding him." Claire stood beside the aisle, not on the stage, not taking the microphone, not crying in front of the crowd. She simply stood there, her hands at her sides, feeling her heart beat so hard it seemed to strike her rib. Evan turned toward her, in front of thousands of people and tens of thousands watching the live stream. He had to choose a face. He chose the face of pain. "Claire," he said into the microphone, his voice low, like a husband trying to reach his wounded wife. "This is not the way." She looked at him. This time, she did not need to answer, because every sentence he had ever said had already answered another. Afterward, the chaos did not explode loudly at first. It spread in rings. The organizers cut the live stream after a few minutes, but it was too late. Viewers had recorded the screen. Clips spread through the night. Motivational speaker exposed by wife. Husband goals influencer caught controlling wife. Authenticity guru's private audio leaked. Headlines sprang up like dry grass catching fire. Comments turned with the brutal speed of the internet. The very thing that had lifted Evan now turning to tear him down. People who had once called Claire lucky began writing that they had always sensed something off. People who had once called Evan safe masculinity began analyzing every micro-expression on his face. Some defended him, saying the clips were edited, saying marriage was complicated, saying Claire chose public humiliation so she must not be innocent either. Claire read for a while, then stopped. She had lived for years under other people's judgment, without needing the internet to add to it. The first contract was canceled within 24 hours. A meditation brand said they would pause partnership pending review. A couple's communication app removed the ads featuring Evan. The publisher requested an urgent meeting. A podcast invitation was postponed. Evan's image did not die instantly, but it began to bleed. And what made Claire understand him more than ever was that he did not call her after the video spread to ask whether she was okay. He called and said, "You ruined everything." They met in the house 2 days later, not because Claire wanted to explain, but because she needed to collect her things, and a lawyer advised her to bring someone. Maya came with her. Evan stood in the living room where so many videos had been filmed, with no ring light, no steaming ceramic mug, no soft background music. He looked tired, his beard uneven, his eyes red from lack of sleep or anger. When he saw Maya, he gave a dry laugh. "Of course," Claire said, "I'm here to get my things." Evan looked at her as if she were a stranger who had broken into his house. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Yes." "No, you don't. You think you spoke truth to power. You think you had a moment. You don't understand how many people depend on this work. My team, clients, people who were actually helped by the message." Claire looked around the room. On the table was still a stack of books about healthy love. "You still call it the message? Because it is bigger than me. It was always bigger than me." Evan stepped closer, and Maya also stepped forward slightly. He noticed and stopped, smiling bitterly. "I never hit you, Claire. I never locked you in a room, never took your money, never told you you couldn't go anywhere. But you stood in front of the world and acted like I was a monster." Claire felt that touch the old place inside her, the place where she had once feared she did not have enough evidence to call her pain real. But that place had hardened. "You didn't have to hit me to make me disappear." Evan shook his head. "That is exactly the kind of line people will eat up." "No," she said, "that is what I lived." He looked at her for a long time, then the false pity returned. "You let the comment section think for you." Claire almost smiled, but there was no joy in it. "No, I just stopped letting you think for me." Evan said, "You ruined everything." Claire answered, "No, I just stopped protecting your lie." His face went rigid, not because it made him understand, because it was clean enough that he could not immediately edit. Leaving did not bring a clean victory. Claire rented a small apartment in Pasadena, farther from the center of things, farther from the house with too many camera angles. The apartment had old wooden floors, a narrow kitchen, and a window overlooking a jacaranda tree that would turn purple in spring, though at that moment it was only dark branches. She brought clothes, her laptop, a few books, a ceramic bowl her mother had once given her, and the hard drive containing all the evidence. In the first days, she barely slept. Every sound of a car outside made her flinch. Every phone notification made her heart pound. The internet was still talking about her. Some people called her brave. Some called her calculating. Some asked why she had stayed so long. Some asked why she had not handled it privately. Some made videos analyzing her face as she stood beside the aisle, saying she looked cold, too prepared, maybe not as innocent as people think. Claire turned off every app. There was no glowing sense of justice. Being seen did not automatically heal the years she had not been believed. It only meant she was no longer completely alone in that truth. A week later, Claire posted one final video. No careful makeup, no beautiful lighting, no music. She placed her phone on a stack of books in the new apartment and sat in front of a blank white wall. She looked into the camera, and for the first few seconds, she said nothing. Viewers would later call that pause powerful. But the truth was she was only trying to breathe. "I didn't expose him," she said in English, because that was the language in which Evan's story had been sold to the world. "I stopped hiding him." She did not add more details. She did not cry so people would believe her. She did not perform her wound to deserve sympathy. She said there were people who did not live two lives because they were misunderstood, but because their public life helped them control their private one. She said the most painful thing was not always being hurt, but watching the person who hurt you be praised for speaking the right language of healing. She said, if someone needs you to stay small so their goodness can look big, that is not love. Then she turned off the camera. The video was not long. It went viral too, but Claire did not read the comments. For the first time in years, she had spoken a sentence that was not written to serve Evan, not edited by him for tone, not placed into any ecosystem except her own survival. A few months later, Evan tried to return with a 27-minute apology video. He sat in a darker room than before, without the perfect background, his voice low, talking about ego, blind spots, harm, accountability. He did not mention Claire's name much. He said he had hurt the people closest to him. He said he was working with a therapist. He said he would step back from public work for a while. Some people forgave him immediately. Some did not. Some said cancel culture had gone too far. Some said his apology still felt like a performance. Claire watched the first 3 minutes, then turned it off. She did not need to know whether he had changed. That was no longer her work. The coldest thing was not that Evan lost everything. He did not lose everything. People like him rarely lose everything. He lost one version of power. But one day he might build another version from the very story of his collapse. He might turn being exposed into a lesson in humility. He might turn Claire into a painful chapter in his journey toward becoming more authentic. People might call him brave again for talking about his mistakes in beautiful language. Claire understood that, and understood that truth did not guarantee justice. Truth only guaranteed that she no longer had to stand in the kitchen listening to him lie about. Spring came to Pasadena, with purple jacaranda blossoms falling onto the sidewalk. Claire still did not feel light. Some mornings, she woke up and felt her body waiting for an evaluation that never came. She put on a red shirt and stood in front of the mirror too long, hearing Evan's voice in her head saying the color was too loud. Then wore it anyway, though it did not feel like victory, only exhaustion. Sometimes she spoke quickly in meetings with new clients and apologized for speaking quickly, even when no one had complained. Some evenings, she wanted to post a photo of the sunset. Then her hand stopped over the post button because she was still waiting for someone to check the tone. Control leaves the house before it leaves the body. Evan was no longer there, but a part of him still lived in her hesitations. That is the real legacy of subtle manipulators. They do not only make you afraid of them, they make you keep doing their work after they are gone. Claire survived, but she did not return to the old woman she had been in Austin. The woman who spoke fast, wore bright colors, laughed loudly without looking around to see who was judging the volume. A part of that woman had been worn down for too long to simply walk back through a door. But another part remained, less radiant, less easily trusting, sharper, quieter. She learned that not every silence was fear. She learned that an unclean kitchen was not moral evidence. She learned to listen when someone spoke beautifully about love, and still watch how they lived when there was no audience. Sometimes, in the evening, she sat by the window of her small apartment, watching car lights move along the street below. And the pain came not like a storm, but like a thin layer of dust settling over everything. She no longer wanted the whole world to understand. The world had once loved the man who pretended. The world would eventually forget, or move on to another story. But Claire was the one who had to keep living with the memory of his voice after the lights went off. The man the world once called perfect had survived on lighting, angles, captions, and the silence of the woman standing outside the frame. Claire did not expose him because she wanted to destroy a beloved man. She simply stopped being the final wall protecting his lie. And that was what made the story colder than any revenge. The truth did not give her back the years that had been rewritten. It did not make everyone who had once doubted her understand everything. It did not erase the comments calling her lucky while she stood in the kitchen trying to swallow her tears. It only left behind a boundary that could not be uncrossed, a closed door behind her, an apartment that was quieter but not exactly warmer, and one final sentence she could keep for herself without anyone editing it. The world loved the man he pretended to be. She survived the man he really was.